In the next scene, Chea wakes up screaming from a nightmare. For the past few days, both Park Yoon-soo and Nam Hae-won have been haunting her dreams. She recalls how furious Yoon-soo looked that day and how neither of them had been in their right mind. At that moment, her phone starts ringing. Geurim, still half asleep, grumbles for her to pick it up quickly. When she sees the caller ID, she mutters that she's probably going to die today. Geurim asks who it is, and she replies that it's Yoon-soo. Chea steps out of her apartment, thinking that it has been a week since their last encounter, and now he has come to pick another fight. She reminds herself that he was the one who betrayed her first, and she has plenty to say to him as well. However, when she approaches, Yoon-soo simply smiles and says, "You came down." He casually tells her to relax, assuring her that he's not going to eat her. She is caught off guard by how cheerful he seems. Then, Yoon-soo tells her there's one last thing to resolve. He has come to take Geurim. He reminds her that he helped her get rid of Nam Hae-won, so now it's her turn to return the favor. Chea immediately pulls out the knife he had given her and warns him to stay where he is. Yoon-soo chuckles and tells her to keep the knife and her threats to herself. She then questions whether Nam Hae-won is really dead. When Yoon-soo confirms it, she tells him to wait while she tries to convince Geurim to come with him. As he watches her limp away on crutches, still holding the knife, he thinks to himself that Chea is truly something. Meanwhile, as Chea heads upstairs, wondering how she will persuade Geurim, she spots him coming down the stairs. The moment he sees her, he turns around to go back up, but Chea quickly asks if he came down because of Yoon-soo. She tells him that Yoon-soo is here to take him back, but Geurim stubbornly replies that he doesn't care. Chea asks if he plans to live with her forever and points out that Yoon-soo keeps coming back. She adds that it must be bothering him too, which makes Geurim pause. She urges him to come down and at least talk to Yoon-soo. When she asks, "Aren't you and Yoon-soo like family?" Geurim remains silent for a moment before hesitantly asking if he can just continue living with her. She reminds him that it's not possible. At the end of the day, he is still a vampire. This comment offends Geurim, and he walks past her toward Yoon-soo. When he comes face to face with Yoon-soo, he firmly states that he will not simply follow him back. First, he demands to hear the truth. Why did Yoon-soo kill his parents? We transition into a flashback as Yoon-soo narrates that after his father left for another country, he was left completely alone, with no one by his side and no purpose, just existing. One snowy night, a woman invited him to stay over, concerned about the weather. Yoon-soo glanced at her neck before agreeing. Of course, he used her to quench his thirst. As he was leaving, a man caught sight of him. Yoon-soo pulled the man into the room, only to realize that the stranger somehow knew his name. Looking closely, he recognized him. It was Son, his old friend. Yoon-soo had believed that everyone had died when the house burned down. His father had many children, and Yoon-soo had assumed none of them had survived. Apparently, Son had thought the same. Noticing that Yoon-soo hadn't aged, Seon quickly deduced that he had become a vampire, just as he had always wanted. Without hesitation, Seon asked Yoon-soo to turn him into one as well. Yoon-soo was startled by the request, but Son insisted. Yoon-soo thought to himself that life as a vampire was unbearably lonely. No friends to talk to, no one to lean on. But if Seon had the same teeth as him, perhaps things would be different. The idea of finally having someone who understood him was tempting, and so he agreed. Seon became a vampire but continued living as a human. Then he met the love of his life, whom he accidentally harmed. From that moment, his will to live faded. One day, Son told Yoon-soo that he was going to reveal his true identity to the woman he loved, hoping that she would choose to become a vampire too, that she would understand how deeply he loved her. But Yoon-soo thought to himself that it was all a lie. There were only two possible reactions when humans learned the truth. Either they became jealous or they ended up hating them. And just as Yoon-soo expected, the woman who was pregnant with Seon's child chose to leave, terrified of him. With tears streaming down his face, Seon confessed to Yoon-soo that he regretted becoming a vampire. After that, he disappeared, only to return 13 years later with Geurim. He had hurt his wife while pretending to be Yoon-soo. Crying, he told Yoon-soo that his family looked at him as if they had seen a ghost. Son had changed his son's name from Hansuk to Geurim and had cried all day. It was difficult for Yunsu to watch him suffer. He wondered why it was so hard for Sion to let go of his ties to humans, why he continued to regret it. Suddenly, Yunsu heard a noise and rushed to see Son choking Geurim. He immediately shoved Sion back and demanded to know what the hell he was doing. Sion, still crying, said that it was better for Geurim not to live, that he couldn't let his son suffer the life of a vampire. Yunsu argued that no matter what, how could he do this to his own child? There was nothing they could do about it now. But Son, overwhelmed with sorrow, insisted that he had believed life would be better as a vampire. They didn't have to worry about food or clothing, yet living in secrecy and being hated by the people he loved was too much to bear. He accused Yunsu of knowing all of this from the start. Yunsu tried to argue that becoming a vampire was Son's own choice, but Son countered that Yunsu should have stopped him. Sion said that Yunsu had known the truth all along and still made a selfish decision. Falling to his knees, Son wondered when his existence would finally come to an end. Then, looking up at Yunsu, he asked if there was a way, if Yunsu could end other vampires. Desperately, he begged Yunsu to kill both him and Geurim, insisting that since Geurim wasn't Yunsu's child, it would be no different from hunting for food. But Yunsu refused, saying that if he did, he would be alone again. Son continued to plead, and in that moment, Yunsu was consumed by guilt for turning Son into a vampire just because he had wanted a friend. And now, Son would become his last friend. Yunsu drank blood from the silver cup, and in his final moments, Son once again told him to do the same to Geurim. But Yunsu couldn't bring himself to do it. Now, in the present, Geurim demands to know if Yunsu was the one who did it. Yunsu answers that yes, it was him. Upon hearing this, Geurim runs away, and as Yunsu watches him disappear, he recalls Son's last words and wonders how he could ever tell Geurim the whole truth.